At least flowers don't have to use the correct fork. By CoramDeo. With the blade glinting in the light, Asriel raised the knife and closed his eyes for just a moment. He hadn't wanted this. He had tried desperately to escape the fate that had relentlessly driven him to this point. But he had never been the one in control. There was no way to avoid this. There never had been. As his knife plunged downward and cut through soft skin, he wondered if Frisk shared any of the same regrets. Probably not, he thought, as he sliced his potato.
Yeah, that made a lot more sense than anything.
He popped a piece into his mouth and glanced sidelong at his brother, sitting a couple of seats away on his right, who was delicately taking a bite of salmon. Unlike Kara and Asriel, who had groaned loudly when their parents announced they would be required to attend yet another incredibly boring state banquet, Frisk had taken the news without a fuss. It wasn't that Frisk was the world's most gifted dinner conversationalist, or that he particularly liked being stuck at a banquet table for hours, but his easygoing, up-for-anything manner meant that he shrugged and politely did what was necessary at diplomatic events without complaining, even if that meant dressing up in uncomfortable formal wear and attending stuffy dinners with weird food and uninteresting dignitaries and listening to the adults talk about extremely boring things for hours, like right now. Asriel sighed and slumped down a little, only remembering at the last second not to stick his elbow on the table to prop his head up. He snapped back up and glanced nervously at his mother on the other side of the massive round table to see if another glare was forthcoming. Fortunately, she was occupied talking to some lady diplomat next to her. He looked over at Kara to see how she was getting along, 2 seats away on his left. She caught his glance and rolled her eyes. It was some consolation, at least, to know that the two of them were united in suffering. Kara was wearing the green and gold gown she liked, and had on a silver necklace, just like Mom's, with an intricately carved Delta rune pendant.
That's pretty.
It really didn't go very well with the golden chain and locket around her neck. But Mom hadn't said a word about it. She hadn't said anything to him either, Asriel thought, looking down at his own locket, even though it wasn't really the sort of thing you wore to a formal dinner.
Totally different to a formal dinner.
What was hilarious was that Kara had to wear some sort of princessy crown thing on her head,
Oh no.
a simpler version of the delicate gold circlet Mom had around her horns. Of the 3 children, Kara enjoyed dressing up the most, but she hadn't learned the art of gracefully holding her head in such a way that the crown didn't slip off. Asriel felt a little guilty over the amusement he got, watching it slide away from her every time she tilted her head down too far, before her hand shot up to catch it. After the 3rd time it had almost landed in her food, he couldn't help but snort just a bit. Too subtly for the guests on either side of him to notice, but enough for his sister to shoot him a death glare. He wished she and Frisk could have been sitting next to him. Unfortunately, some dumb protocol called for monster representatives and the human dignitaries to sit alternately around the large circular banquet table, human next to monster. It didn't seem fair that Mom and Dad got to sit beside each other, even if they were the queen and king. Kara had argued with Dad that having the 3 dreamer children sitting next to each other, with Asriel in the middle, would follow the monster-human seating arrangement. But apparently that didn't count.
Why not, though?
Yeah, it's probably like
So
human dignitary, monster dignitary. And
so they
Kara
are
and...
monsters?
well, they're part of the dreamer
Then
family, I
she's 2
guess.
seats away. Does that mean there's one person separating them?
Yes.
So then,
So a human on his left and a human on his
so
right.
then there's a human beside Kara, I guess.
Yeah. So Asriel, and then to his left is a human, and then Kara. To his right is a human, and then Frisk.
Mm-hmm.
And then farther away is Mom and Dad. Asriel sighed and returned his attention to his plate, picking at his food with a heavy engraved silver fork that his family never used, except for times like this. In fact, everything about this meal was different compared to the normal, relaxed lifestyle his family usually enjoyed. The food was particularly dainty and exotic, Asriel supposed, which meant that it was weird and tasted funny. The only drink options were water, and for the adults, wine. Certainly no soda. Not even any apple juice. The plates were fancy and had gold trim. The silverware was incredibly ornate. The napkins were stiff and heavy and stuffed into funny little silver rings. Even the room was unusual, although familiar in a slightly unnerving way. The dreamers had no royal residence on the surface, and they could hardly invite distinguished state visitors to dine at their ordinary 2-story home in the suburbs of Ebbet Valley. So, the new home palace in the underground was kept alive and welcoming for just such an occasion. If his parents felt conflicted about returning to the kingdom of their imprisonment, hosting the kind of people who had once put them there, they didn't show it. It still felt a little weird to Asriel, though. At least the humans seemed impressed when they were escorted in through the barrier cavern and saw the grand palace in front of them, imposing with its massive rough stone walls, and yet still cheerful and warm, lit up from every window and glowing under the twinkling rock stars that encrusted the cave ceiling far above them. What the stone palace lacked in exterior opulence, it more than made up for in location. Asriel glanced around the table. Everybody was either busy with their fancy food or carrying on some meaningless small talk with the person next to them. Dad had a neutral, pleasant look on his face as the Earl of something or other gestured with his fork. Yep. That's what it is, something dash or dash other. Gestured with his fork, frowning as he spoke with some intensity. Mom was daintily dabbing her muzzle with the corner of her napkin, the way she had drilled into each of her children. All of them thought it was ridiculous. If you've got a napkin the size of a hand towel, why not just rub your whole face with it when it's sticky? The only ones who seemed to fully be enjoying themselves were Gerson and a retired military officer seated next to him.
Oh, man.
The grizzled veteran was as wrinkled as a prune and had to be at least 80. His military jacket, festooned with various ribbons and medals, had probably looked quite impressive earlier, but was now unbuttoned and rumpled as the man huddled together conspiratorially with Gerson, tapping him occasionally with his wine glass or slapping him on the shell as the two of them cackled together.
They're definitely not following protocol. Okay.
I think they can get away with it.
Gerson's manners go out the window when you're quadruple
Gerson
digits.
is old enough. Yeah, Gerson is old enough that manners don't apply.
And probably the human guy is too.
Yeah, and if one of each kind is doing it, then the other kind can't.
They're probably having a great time.
Yeah.
Asriel turned back to his food. The potatoes were decent, at least. The fish was okay, he supposed, but not really his favorite. The vegetables held no interest for him at all. A bunch of some green spear-type things.
Celery is good.
Asparagus.
Asparagus.
Yeah, probably asparagus.
Exotic stuff.
Yep. A bunch of some kind of green spear-type things, and a dollop of some weird bright pink stuff that quivered when he poked it with his fork.
Some kind of jelly or something.
He had also been served something called caviar. He wasn't entirely sure what it was, but Kara wasn't touching hers, so he wasn't going to risk it. Did anyone actually like this stuff? Why couldn't you just have burgers and potato chips at a state dinner? Or pizza? Who didn't like pizza? Wouldn't the humans enjoy that more?
Asriel.
He sure would. His dreamy vision of a huge stuffed crust pepperoni pizza was interrupted by a crash near the banquet hall, causing him to jump. A few guests lifted their heads, but since this wasn't the first unusual sound coming from behind the kitchen doors, no one paid much attention. No one except Asriel, whose heart was pounding as he tried to smooth his fur back down. The one interesting thing about this particular state banquet, if you could call a sword of Damocles dangling above your head interesting, was the moment of absolute terror that punctuated it. Not terror for everyone, just for Asriel. As much as Mom loved to cook, her position as the queen of all monsters necessitated that the meal preparation for diplomatic banquets be turned over to someone else. Usually that was someone competent.
I see.
Tonight, it was Undine and Papyrus.
And somehow they're still turning out food that's decent.
Maybe Toriel gave them some lessons.
To be fair,
Type stuff.
yeah. To be fair, the culinary skills of both of them had advanced beyond the house incineration level. Papyrus's enthusiasm in discovering a new, less weapon-based method of cooking from Mom had led him to request that his lessons with Undine be augmented by supplemental training from the Queen. Undine had been deeply suspicious of the lack of spear-based passion in Toriel's methods, but she couldn't argue with the mouth-watering results. And so, over the course of many months, Mom had gently but firmly taught the two of them how to bake, fry, roast, grill, poach, and saute an impressive number of dishes.
My cookbook, my cooking textbook.
Nope. I did not. I just Googled it.
Oh.
No, I don't think any of this comes from your culinary class. She even taught them how to tourne cut potatoes into little...
Hold a minute! Wait a second! Hey, you
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. Good timing. Hey, you taught me some things. It made the story better. She even taught them how to tourne cut potatoes into little 7-sided ovals. Papyrus thought they were charming. Asriel thought it was silly.
I like how it's like all these people think it's great, and it's like Asriel thought it was dumb because it kind of is.
Great.
Did you
7-sided oval
Did I
potatoes.
tell you they had 7 sides?
Probably.
I did have to Google that,
Oh,
but
wow.
yeah, I did remember the tourne cutting of potatoes. Fast forward to this week, when the Queen had displayed an astonishing and worrisome level of trust in her two students.
Well, they didn't turnate him for this meal
Yeah.
because he was cutting through the skin. And
That's
there's
true.
no skin on tournays.
Oh, very, very good. Good thing I didn't include that particular thing. But anyway, when the Queen had displayed an astonishing and worrisome level of trust in her two students by declaring they were ready for something grand and had put them in charge of preparing the meal for the evening. Frisk had shrugged with a grin upon hearing the news, but Asriel had been gobsmacked. Frisk may have only seen Undine's house burned down once, but Flowey's unique and repeated sojourns through the underground had given him a front-row seat to the immolation of her home several times during her dinner preparation,
Like several times.
sometimes taking out the Blook family farm and residences with it. There had even been a few timelines where Undine had visited the MTT Resort restaurant, discovered that she couldn't get anything without a reservation, and had kicked her way into the kitchen to whip up something herself. Flowey hadn't understood how it was physically possible for jets of fire to shoot out of every single window in the building simultaneously, but he hadn't stuck around to find out.
Maybe they all had like gas-powered stoves in their room and all the gas lines were connected.
I guess when Undines,
Everything
it can really
Like they're just,
affect the whole hotel.
Spears shoot out 360 degrees and up and down and literally in every direction possible. They shoot out and explode everything.
He hadn't stayed around to find out when the flames came.
Good.
There was little danger of that happening tonight. Nevertheless, several unexpected crashing and clattering sounds from the kitchen adjacent to the dining room, accompanied by barely restrained yells and "Nyah!" outbursts, had seriously rattled Asriel's nerves. Earlier, the human guests had occasionally glanced at the swinging doors with concern, But his parents' well-practiced diplomatic skills allowed them to continue talking at perfect ease as the unseen disasters occurred in the kitchen, keeping their confused guests mostly at ease. Eventually, the ominous culinary sounds almost became part of the background noise. But for the 11th...
What are they even still cooking? The dessert?
No. But for the 11th time during the dinner, Asriel turned his head to glance at the fire extinguisher discreetly mounted on the wall close to his chair.
They have a fire extinguisher.
Just in case. As the noise died down, everything returned to normal around the table. Which was to say, it went back to being mind-numbingly boring. Asriel sighed and tried to figure out if there was a way he could snag another bun, since he had wolfed his down at the start of the meal.
Did they not have courses?
I guess not.
I don't know.
Usually you'll have salad or soup and a bun as the first course.
Well, I
If
guess...
it's really fancy,
maybe he
you might
did,
have
and
a
he just...
salad and then a soup.
Well, whatever it was, I guess he got his bun right away and ate it. And then, like me, wishes he had another one. Without warning, something struck him in the face.
Kara threw a bun at him.
He jerked back and instinctively reached up to his muzzle before looking down to see what had just hit him. He had eaten his entire salad earlier, which seemed safer than the weird jiggly food on his plate. But the bowl, which was empty a moment ago, now contained a solitary pea. He looked at it in disbelief, slowly coming to the inescapable conclusion that someone, during this very important, very formal state banquet, had just intentionally pelted him with a pea.
Kara or Frisk or Gerslin.
There was no mystery here. He turned to glare at the perpetrator. Kara was acting very innocent, taking a sip of water from her goblet and refusing to meet his eyes. Asriel wasn't fooled for a minute.
Oh dear.
He glanced at the woman sitting between them and waited for her to look away. Without raising his arm, he pointed a claw at his sister. A small, almost transparent beam of light shot out of it, and a nearly invisible star sailed across and collided with Kara's ear. Instantly, he realized his mistake. The shock in her wide-open eyes and the spluttering she made as she involuntarily tipped her goblet into her face, sloshing some of the water onto the table, told Asriel that Kara's innocent act hadn't been an act at all. It only took a second for her to wipe her face, then turn her outraged crimson eyes on him. Asriel could feel his face growing uncomfortably warm. He tried to subtly lift his palms facing her, while mouthing, "Sorry." She spread out her hands in return, raising her eyebrows in a non-verbal demand that he explain himself. Before he could figure out how he could possibly escape Kara's righteous wrath, Asriel's salvation unexpectedly arrived in the form of another pea bouncing off Kara's nose. She twitched, blinking in surprise, and lowered her hands. She stared in confusion at her brother again, and Asriel, in a burst of inspiration, picked up and showed her the pea that had landed in his salad bowl. A light of understanding came into Kara's eyes,
Revenge.
and she gave a small nod. Both of them turned to glare at Frisk. Asriel paused. Frisk certainly looked innocent, in the process of grimacing as he took a bite of his caviar. But wasn't that the perfect way to avoid suspicion?
Just watch it be like Oreo or something.
Fire off an attack and then do something painful to yourself to disguise it? On the other hand, Asriel didn't want to launch another undeserved counteroffensive. On the other hand, who else could the culprit possibly be but Frisk?
One of the humans?
That question, which was meant to be rhetorical, suddenly took on a much greater significance as Frisk was hit right between the eyes with a pea. He recoiled, and his eyes shot wide open, which was almost the normal amount of open compared to everyone else. Immediately he turned to stare at Asriel, open-mouthed, then at Kara. Asriel turned as well. Kara already had a pea loaded up in her spoon, apparently preparing to enter the battle, but she was now staring at Frisk in surprise. For another few seconds, the three siblings exchanged confused looks with each other.
I'm still holding the Gerson.
A vital clue arrived in the form of another pea bouncing off Asriel's head. This time he caught the trajectory and whipped his head to look. Gerson's gleeful eyes met him across the table. The turtle monster had a spoon dangling in his hand from which he had just launched yet another projectile, and a small arsenal of peas sat on his napkin. He gave Asriel a huge smile and a wink. The oldster beside him was doubled over his plate, clutching a spoon of his own and convulsing with barely suppressed laughter. He raised himself up and pointed at Frisk before succumbing to another fit. Gerson gave the other two children an exaggerated wink before using his spoon to daintily take a sip of his soup. The skirmish came to a sudden halt, as did all other activity around the table, as an incredible cacophony of crashing, shattering, and a noise that sounded remarkably like a spear repeatedly pounding a steel pot burst from the kitchen.
Spaghetti.
The frosted glass windows...
Chocolate spaghetti for dessert?
No, they're just making spaghetti.
The frosted glass windows on the kitchen doors suddenly became opaque as something splattered onto them and slowly began to ooze downwards. An alarm started going off in the kitchen. Several excited voices could be heard behind the doors, and a minute later the goopy substance on the windows was wiped off. The harsh buzz of the alarm disappeared abruptly with a crunching sound. A moment later, a skeleton dressed in a formal outfit, complete with bow tie and red vest, stepped through the swinging doors. He cleared his throat loudly. "I do sincerely and heartily apologize, most noble human dignitaries and assembled royalty, but there will be a slight delay in the arrival of dessert. On behalf of the entire culinary staff, please accept our humble apologies." He bowed deeply at the waist. The effect was somewhat different than the respect he intended to convey, as his upper body bent all the way down until his head touched his kneecaps. Fortunately, he missed the several gasps of pain from around the table. The king, who was closest, quickly put out a paw to gently unfold him. "Thank you, Papyrus. I am sure that the dessert will taste all the better for what little delay there may be in its arrival." "Thank you, your majesty," said the skeleton, returning to normal shape. "I trust that you will not be disappointed by the scrumptious delicacy we are whipping up right now." Papyrus caught the queen's glance and tactfully converted his cackling into a few coughs. "At any rate, most exalted lords and ladies, dukes and duchesses, earls and earlesses, please enjoy your meal while we clean up that is, while we work on the finishing touches. We will have more buns sent out for you to nosh on until then." With a bow, far less bendy this time, Papyrus turned and disappeared through the doors. Slowly the chatter around the table picked up again, and the momentary terror turned back into ordinary boringness. But at least there were more buns now. As the minutes wore on, Asriel wished he had someone to talk to. He had met, then promptly forgotten, the name of the man who sat between him and Frisk, a rotund civil servant who had mumbled a greeting, then plowed into the meal as soon as the first course arrived.
Hey, there are courses.
Hey, there are courses.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot.
Hey.
The author put courses in here. The man hadn't looked up since, other than to briefly note the drama that occasionally emanated from the kitchen. To the prince's left was a middle-aged woman, a sour-faced diplomatic attaché of some kind. Dad had told him once what that meant, but he'd forgotten. Who hadn't looked terribly pleased at discovering her place in the pecking order landed her a seat between two children. As for her name, Asriel definitely remembered it, to the point of turning red and fighting down giggles if he thought about it too long. Kara had spotted the name Madame Swainmoth on the guest list earlier that day. "Hey, Ree, look! Madame Swine-Mouth is going to be attending tonight." Asriel snorted. "What? That can't be her name!" He looked where Kara was pointing. "That's Swain-Moth!" "It probably means pig in their language. We get to sit next to Lady Porkchop." "Stop, Kara!" Asriel covered his mouth to muffle the giggles.
If I ever have some silly thing I'm doing and I need a name, I'm gonna call them Lady Porkchop.
"Sure." Asriel covered his mouth to muffle the giggles that were starting to escape, which wasn't helped by the mirth in his sister's eyes. "They speak the same language as us, and you're gonna get us in trouble!" "Okay, fine, whatever, Ree. I just thought you wanted to know. I'm sorry you feel that way about Madame Pigface." "Stop!" After fighting down chortles, the two of them settled back into their schoolwork. For about 30 seconds, the only sound was the scratching of pencils in notebooks. Kara's quiet voice broke the silence. Oink. The explosions and snortings from both of them brought Toriel into the living room, wondering what was so funny. They blanched, but the force of Toriel's momly glare of suspicion was too much to resist, and they confessed. The result was a stern lecture on the importance of polite social protocol and a ban on playing any video games for the rest of the day.
Ooh.
As uninteresting as the man to his right was, Asriel desperately wished that Madame Swainmoth would follow his example and stick to her food. She was the sort of woman who clearly had no idea how to talk to children. From time to time she would turn to either him or his sister and speak in a condescending sing-song voice that was just a little too loud, as if they were 4-year-olds. "Well, Asriel," she said for the third time,
That sounds like a medicine. Asriel.
Ezrol, if you want to know. She said for the third time, producing a snort from 2 seats off to his right. "You have such long, floppy ears. Do your special ears let you hear things far, far away?" Asriel unclenched his teeth. "I'm not really sure, ma'am. I guess. They just work like normal ears for me." "They're so soft!" cooed the woman, reaching out a hand to stroke one. Asriel cringed and tried to lean away as tactfully as he could, fighting to keep
is not allowed to pet Asriel's ears.
fighting to keep his expression neutral. Turning away from the caressing fingers, he caught sight of Frisk and saw the sympathy in his eyes. He was sure his own eyes were desperate, calling for help that wouldn't come. "Do you ever have problems with water getting in your ears, Asriel? I have a Pekingese. That's a type of small dog, you know, and it's so hard when she gets water down her ears. I have to use vinegar to try to clean them out. Does your mother do that for yours?" "No, ma'am," he said, reaching up a hand to brush his own ear and gently break the lady's fingers away from it. "My ears don't really have that problem, and I can clean them myself." "Oh, good for you!" she gushed, contorting her face into a patronizing grin. Asriel managed a watery smile and turned to his food, hoping desperately that the lady would take a hint and leave him alone. It worked, but it turned out he had sacrificed his sister in the process. "And you, sweetie! What a pretty crown you have on your head! That's called a tiara, I believe." Asriel risked looking back over. Kara had fixed her with a stare, possibly preventing the lady from reaching up to fiddle with the tiara. "Thank you. Yes, that is what it is called," she said evenly. "And don't you look lovely in that dress? I expect a fancy meal like this must be a real treat for you, isn't it? Asriel watched Kara's face carefully for any warning signs, but to his relief, she appeared to be keeping things under control. She even managed to produce a strained smile. Thank you. We certainly don't have meals like this at home. No, it's such delicious human food. It must be a little frightening living with monsters, isn't it, sweetie? I'll bet it's a nice change to be with your own people tonight, isn't it?
Hey, wrong thing to say!
The fire that leapt into Kara's crimson eyes caused Asriel to gasp. From the sharp intake of breath to his right, he knew Frisk had heard the tactless question as well. But almost immediately, Kara relaxed. A silly smile spread over her face, and she tilted her head bashfully. Oh no. Asriel's wide eyes darted over to Frisk. His brother gave a small, nervous shake of his head, confirming his fears. She's doing the silly little girl thing. No, Kara, no. My own people? You mean people like you? Oh, that's so silly. No, I love being with my monster family, Madam Swinemouth. Kara chirped happily, one hand idly twirling her long auburn hair. The lady's fork stopped above her plate as her mouth fell open. Asriel died. He glanced over to see that Frisk was dead as well, covering his face with one hand. Maybe it hadn't been so bad being Flowey. At least Flowey could have burrowed his way out of here. Mom is really nice, bubbled Kara in a childish voice, ignoring the lady's frozen expression. Dad is great too, and Ree and Frisk are so fun to have as brothers, she added, gesturing towards the two of them. Don't drag us into this, Asriel pleaded with his eyes. Frisk was finding a piece of eggplant on his plate incredibly interesting. I'm so glad to have all my monster friends too. They're so much better than dumb humans. Kara batted her eyes at the woman who...
I can just ignore everything.
Insulting the woman so badly and pretending
dear.
like she's completely...
Kara batted her eyes at the woman who was not moving. Humans always come here to the palace and do silly things like bow to each other and shake hands while people take pictures and talk with Mom and Dad about boring things I don't understand, like laws or money. Kara smiled sweetly as she tilted her head bashfully. Or international sovereignty recognition, or the emerging field of thaumatological-based medicine, or the soteriological implications for monster souls, or the danger of the
What is that?
Good question.
Soteriological?
Yeah.
I bet there's a silent letter in there somewhere.
Salvation. Can monsters be saved?
Whoa!
Or the danger of the precious metals market collapsing if a glut of surplus gold is dumped onto the market, resulting in supply far outstripping demand. You know, silly grown-up things like that. Asriel wasn't sure if the lady had blinked in the last 30 seconds. Bits of caviar were falling off of her fork as it quivered slightly. Kara giggled. Oh, and the other nice thing about monsters compared to dumb humans is that they get to have cool things like horns and stuff. Maybe one day I'll have some little horns just like Mom. Oh. Kara's innocent eyes opened wide. Asriel gripped the edge of his table, unable to tear his eyes away from the unfolding disaster. Are you part monster too, Madame Swinemouth? It looks like you might be getting a little pig snout. She reached up and gently brushed the woman's nose. The woman's face turned beet red, and her fork full of caviar tipped into her wine glass. Just as Asriel decided that sliding under the table might be the least embarrassing choice available to him, the diplomatic train wreck came to a merciful end by an entirely different disaster.
Oh, no.
A sudden crash caught everyone's attention, and the eyes of all the guests, even the shell-shocked woman next to him, snapped in the direction of the kitchen where the doors had just burst open. Afterwards, Asriel figured that the door's violent swinging was due to an enthusiastic kick, though he wasn't sure if it was from the head chef or her assistant. All he knew in that one horrifying second, as his eyes locked onto the doorway and time itself slowed to a standstill, was that flames were coming out of the kitchen. He was dimly aware of someone yelling out, "Fire!" only later realizing it was himself. In one smooth motion, practiced to perfection in his mind 11 times already in the last hour, Asriel propelled himself onto his feet, tipping his chair over backwards in the process, and swept the fire extinguisher off the wall. One claw yanked the safety ring free as he swung back around. Raising the cylinder, he aimed the flexible hose at the yellowish-blue flames that now appeared to be engulfing Undine as she emerged from the kitchen. He squeezed the trigger. A wide plume of opaque white froth shot out, instantly covering the astonished man who had been sitting next to him, along with Frisk and a couple of other guests. In a panic, Asriel felt his way around the chairs, trying to judge in which direction the flames were behind the wall of foam in front of him. Finally, unable to see what was going on, he released the trigger and strained to look through the mist to see if there was still any danger. As he did so, Asriel slowly became aware of 2 things. First, the sounds of the room, which had disappeared for him during that moment of single-minded focus, began to return. There seemed to be an awful lot of scuffling and shouting going on. The other thing was the sight of Undine, standing just beside the queen, soaked to the skin, ponytail dripping on the carpet, her chef's hat drooping to one side. Her mouth hung open, and the eye that was fixed on Asriel was filled with pure, unadulterated bewilderment. In her hands was a silver platter which bore the sad, pummeled remains of a large baked Alaska. Its ice cream had been blown off, and the meringue top had exploded onto several guests. His mother, frozen in her chair and staring at him in disbelief, did not seem to be aware of the large glob of gourmet ice cream that was slowly sliding off of her ear. Needless to say, the flaming dessert had been successfully extinguished.
Flaming dessert.
It was. Asriel's vision began to go blurry, as his mime screamed at him that no, this wasn't happening. This was not happening. This could not possibly be happening. His knees started to wobble. He became dimly aware of the other guests. Frisk, now at his side, reaching out to steady him. A monster and a human wheezing and laughing uproariously. His mother opening and shutting her mouth several times. Before anyone else could react, however, Undine slapped the cake down in front of the queen, launching a few more chunks of meringue into the air, and gave Asriel a razor-sharp, ear-to-ear grin. "Yeah! Yeah! That was awesome! I had no idea that's how you put this thing out! Hey, Papyrus!" she yelled back into the kitchen. "I thought you said the alcohol was supposed to go out by itself! You didn't tell me about the whole fire extinguisher thing!" She slapped the dazed prince heartily on the back. "Way to go, punk!" Asriel would have collapsed if Frisk wasn't propping him up. "Hey, Toriel! Sorry, I mean, Your Majesty, we gotta try that again! Can you light this thing back up for me? I want to give it a try. Hey, Paps, throw me the fire extinguisher on the wall next to the stove. After that, things became a blur for Asriel. As his mother grabbed Undine's sleeve and pulled her down for a whisper, Asriel heard his father stand and launch into an impromptu but dignified apology. Most of the guests didn't pay any attention. Their gobsmacked faces were staring at Asriel.
Did he get swine now?
No, she was on the other side.
Man.
The room started to spin around him. The fire extinguisher fell to the floor with a clunk. He glanced down to see if there was any dirt under his roots, so he could just burrow away. Wait, wasn't there some reason that he couldn't? He felt Frisk's arms around him, and a moment later, Kara was on his other side, speaking gently to him, as she and Frisk carefully led him out of the royal dining hall. So, it wasn't all bad, Frisk said, as he spun around in the swivel rocker the next morning. The sun's golden rays bathed the living room in a soft, cheerful light, a marked contrast to the listless goat boy lying on the sofa reading a book, and the girl seated at the dining room table, pen in hand, frowning at the sheet of paper in front of her. Dad said he was glad it finally got the guy next to him to stop talking. He said he kept going on and on about some legal thing for most of the meal, and he kept trying to get Dad to promise to do something. Mom said most of the guests ended up thinking it was pretty funny. Kara looked up. What did she say about the ones who got soaked right in front of the fire extinguisher? She didn't mention them. Asriel groaned and covered his face with the book. And it sounds like the old guy sitting next to Gerson is some bigwig in their government. He told Dad that he had never had as much fun at a banquet as the one last night. So that's good, Frisk added hopefully. Oh, and Undine told Mom that she wants to learn what other things she can cook that involve fire extinguishers. Mom was laughing when she mentioned it, so sounds like she's taking it okay. Asriel grunted non-committally from under the book. Undine even tried eating some of the dessert. What, really? Asriel asked, pulling the book away and sitting up. What did it taste like? She said it was pretty good. A little wetter than she expected, but apparently it was good enough that she and Papyrus cut it in half so they could both take some home. Poor Mom, Kara said. Months of careful unteaching and reteaching how to cook, undone by Asriel's new innovations. What are you going to call that one, Ree? Vapor blast cooking? Oh, I know! The Aqua Fur School of Cooking. The prince tugged his ears over his eyes and moaned. I don't ever want to see a fire extinguisher ever again. Cheer up, Ree, Kara offered. Look at it this way. Undine is far less likely to burn down any kitchen she's in if she's using fire extinguishers as part of the cooking. Oh, speaking of fire, that reminds me. Frisk hopped out of the swivel chair and trotted over to the family computer.
Uh-oh.
You guys want to play some Riven? I've got an idea how to solve that fire marble puzzle on the giant dome. Yeah, said Asriel, bouncing off the couch. But he stopped mid-stride as he caught sight of Kara's sudden scowl. Oh, wait, I forgot. Kara can't. Why did I get grounded? Kara exploded, throwing down her pen. Asriel fire hoses the whole room and covers half the people in ice cream, and he gets off scot-free. But I make a little joke with some fussy old woman, and now I don't get to play video games for 2 weeks? And I have to write her an apology letter? Asriel blushed and looked down. Frisk came to his rescue. I think it was intentions, sis. Dad says a king has to make quick decisions sometimes, and as he was trying to put out a fire, it was just a mistake. Whereas you were... Frisk trailed off.
Solve the fire marble puzzle.
Frisk trailed off sheepishly. I was trying to protect Ree. Did you see how she was fiddling with his ears like he was a goat at some petting zoo? And did you hear what she was saying about monsters? Oh, sweetie pie, Cara mimicked in a sing-song voice. Aren't you lucky that you get to sit with humans tonight and not those icky monsters? Ugh! She rolled her eyes and shook her head. She got what she deserved as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, thanks, I guess, Asriel said awkwardly, fiddling with his ears again. She was kind of rude, a little, but I didn't mean for you to get in trouble about it. Well, write a nice letter, and maybe Mom and Dad will change their mind and unground you, encouraged Frisk. Oh, replied his sister. You guys want to hear what I've written so far? Tell me how this sounds. Asriel plopped back on the couch, and Frisk sat on the office chair by the computer. Cara picked up the paper and cleared her throat. After the Dear Mrs. Swainmoth part, it says, On this occasion, I wanted to write to you to tell you how sorry I am for what happened at the banquet. I am sorry for what I said and did that night. Nothing can excuse my rude behavior. She looked up. How's that so far? Frisk and Asriel looked at each other. Well, it sounds a little stilted, I think, but I guess it's a good start, said Frisk. Yeah, it's pretty good, said Asriel, nodding. Those are probably the right things to say. Good, said Cara. There was an odd gleam in her eye as she picked up her pen and turned back to her letter. Now, help me think of a sentence that starts with the letter K. The two boys stared at her in confusion. Suddenly, Asriel's eyes shot wide open.
Could you read that one more time?
Sure. I'll be happy to. It says, On this occasion, I wanted to write to you to tell you how sorry I am for what happened at the banquet. I am sorry for what I said and did that night. Nothing can excuse my rude behavior. The two boys stared at her in confusion. Suddenly, Asriel's eyes shot wide open. He jumped up from the couch and marched over to the table. Let me see that! He demanded, reaching for the letter.
Lined them all up, didn't she?
Cara made no attempt to stop him as he grabbed it, her face alight with glee. Frisk stepped over hesitantly. Asriel scanned the letter quickly. No! He narrowed his eyes as he looked up. Cara grinned at him. No, absolutely not, Cara! You are not sending her this letter! You are going to get grounded for a year! She'll never notice, Cara assured him, still grinning and twirling the pen. It'll be our secret. What are you talking about? Asked Frisk as he tried to read the letter in Asriel's paw. The furry boy shook his head. I'm sorry, Cara, but as your brother and protector and future king, it is my solemn duty to save you from yourself. With a puff, the paper burst into flames. No! Frisk yelped and hopped back. A few seconds later, both the flames and the paper had disappeared. A small pile of ash dropped onto the table. Oh, for crying out loud, Ree! She never would have figured it out! Cara tried to look mad, but didn't entirely succeed. Yeah, but Mom and Dad would have wanted to read it before you mailed it, and they might have. Excuse me, said Frisk, still mystified. What is going on here? Nothing, Cara griped, stepping over to the desk to get a new sheet of paper. Ree's just being a worrywart, that's all. It is a sign of my love and commitment to my sister, announced Asriel, posing heroically and putting a paw on his chest. One day she will thank me for saving her from her own stupid ideas. I beg your pardon? I'm going to thank you, Mr. Super Soaker? You're lucky the humans didn't just leave the palace and put up a barrier on the way out. Her brother wasn't listening. His clasped paws flew to his cheek. Oh, Asriel, he cooed. Thank you so much for saving me. Truly, you are the greatest of brothers, and your vast wisdom has saved me. And your vast wisdom has saved me once again from my incredibly dumb plans. I count it a great honor to be your sister and to benefit from your sage advice. And how about you benefit from my fists? With a bleat, Asriel toppled backwards onto the couch as Kara dove on him and began pummeling him with throw pillows. Frisk sighed and walked over to the large drawer under the window seat. I'm going to get a board game ready for whenever you're done. You want to play Ticket to Ride, Kara? Yes, if I get to be yellow. Where's your vast wisdom now, goat face? Azzy, Ticket to Ride? Ah! Cool. Did you hear that? Toriel asked. She and Asgore were in the kitchen, washing the fancy china and silverware by hand. She turned her head. Loud thumpings were coming from the living room, along with an awful lot of squealing. Suddenly there was a loud whomp, followed by silence. Then the sound of several people desperately trying to muffle their giggles with their hands and paws. Was that the sofa tipping over? She asked incredulously. She laid down the platter she was holding and turned, but before she could take a step, Asgore placed a paw over her hand. No, I didn't hear anything. He didn't take his eyes off the serving fork in his hands. And I don't think you did either. Toriel thought for a moment. Then she turned back to the sink and picked up the platter, a long-suffering smile on her face. No, I suppose you are right. It must have been the wind.